Hello, my curious cats, and welcome back to another episode of the Psychology Podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. Honestly, you guys, I think I'm just going to jump straight into this week's episode because it is a bit dark. So I guess, kind of take this as a trigger warning as well. This week's episode includes discussions of PDF files, which can be a very sensitive topic for many of us. Honestly, I debated heavily on whether to even make this episode, but ultimately decided to go for it because this podcast is about exploring psychology's most questionable and at times most messed up history. At the end of the day, psychology is a science and history is history, and we can only hope it never repeats itself, which is why it's important to learn about it, the good as well as the bad. So this week we're learning about Dr. Helmut Kentler, the psychologist who believed that PDF files could make great foster parents. So if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy tozy and let's jump into it. Helmut Kentler, born July 2nd, 1928, a Cancer. No comment. He was born in Germany to a father who worked for the Nazi German government. There isn't too much detail going specifically into his early childhood, but what we do know is that Kentler's parents followed a very strict regimen when it came to raising Helmut. His father specifically was extremely dominant. In raising him, they followed the teachings of Daniel Gottlob Moritz Schreiber. I probably botched that name, and I am so sorry. But this Dr. Daniel was a best-selling German authority on childcare who has been described by scholars as a spiritual precursor of Nazism. Yeah. Daniel outlined principles of child rearing that would create a stronger race for men, ridding them of cowardice, laziness, and unwanted displays of vulnerability and desire. In his 1858 manuscript, Dr. Daniel wrote, quote, "Suppress everything in a child. Emotions must be suffocated in their seed right away." So they, as in Helmut's parents, truly believed that the authority of fathers and suppression of child emotion would create a stronger race for men. Whatever that's supposed to mean, but it certainly explains a lot, as we'll see. When Helmut misbehaved, his father threatened to buy a contraption invented by this Dr. Daniel to promote children's posture and compliance by force using iron rods and leather belts. Okay, listen, as someone who was raised in a very Christian home, I know a thing or two about those leather belts. Whew. If Helmut talked back, his father slammed his fist on the table and shouted at him, "When the father is talking, the children must be silent." In 1938, his father was called into active duty for the German armed forces and quickly rose to rank of colonel, which made him move to Berlin with his family to work at the high command of the army of Nazi Germany. Helmut was 17 when the Nazis were defeated and his father finally came home a shell of a man, according to Helmut. Good. After Helmut graduated high school, he wanted to go to college for theology, as in the study of God and all divine things. He wanted to be a pastor. It makes sense, kind of, given his upbringing, although disclaimer, just because it makes sense doesn't make it right. But that's for a whole other conversation. Surprise, surprise, his dad was not on board. He thought it was too easy of a career and insisted that Helmut get into technical vocational training. So poor Helmut gave in, of course. With a father as demanding of that nature, how could he not? And worked as a locksmith to pay his way through electrical engineering school. Sadly, it wasn't until his overly strict father passed that Helmut was able to truly break free and finally study something he wanted, not something he was forced to. Not only was Helmut finally able to break free of his career, but also his personal life. See, Helmut Kentler was attracted to men. But given his father's stance and seeing what the Nazis were doing to those who were openly gay, there was absolutely no way he could ever express his true self. Helmut felt as if he always had one leg in prison for his secret desires. His father suspected it, given that Helmut never showed interest in women or getting married or starting a family. So both his parents indirectly rejected him for being a, quote, negative biological variant, end quote. He knew they no longer loved him, even though they never outright said it to him. God, I can't imagine the hurt, the pain, the trauma that must have placed on a child. Oh, gosh, okay. His early life breaks my heart, okay? Because, I'm just he just needed to be loved and accepted. Could things have turned out differently if he had been? But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Growing up in a machismo home myself, I'm empathetic about childhood trauma stemming from such actions. As mentioned, Helmut Kentler finally felt somewhat free and felt that he could at least pursue the career he wanted to, not the one that his father told him to. So in 1960, he got his degree in psychology, a field that allowed him to, quote, be an engineer of the manipulated soul, unquote. I love that quote, if I'm being honest. He was heavily involved in student movements, clubs, and activities. At a student meeting of left-wing scholars, he publicly identified himself as gay for the first time in his life. Can you imagine how freeing that felt? He went on to turn his traumatic life experiences into a profession, kind of like me. Side note, as a psychology academic myself, I often struggle with the question of why psychology? I get asked that a lot. Why did you go into psychology? Why specific psychology? And internally, deep down, I know why. But it's a very vulnerable topic for me because I do take my experiences in life and know that I would do anything to ensure others who have had similar experiences know that they're not alone and that they're more valuable than they even know or that they're even told or that they even understand. There's a lot more to it, but it's certainly a running theme that a lot of psychology scholars have in common, I've come to find, actually. Back to Kentler. Also, another side note, if it sounds like I'm defending him in any way, know that I am not. Just because I'm sympathetic for his earlier life and his traumatic experiences does not give him the excuse to do what he did at all. Let's not get it twisted. Let's not get it messed up. All right. So Kentler, he went on to earn his doctorate in social education from the University of Hanover with published dissertation that he titled Parents Learn Sex Education in 1975. He was heavily inspired by the Marxist psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich, who had argued that the free flow of sexual energy was essential to building a new kind of society. So Kentler's dissertation essentially argued parents to teach their children they should never be ashamed of their desires. He stated that, quote, once the first feelings of shame exist, they multiply and expand into all areas of life, unquote. Again, gosh, I hate that he went on to do such terrible things because are you guys listening to this? Okay, this man was passionate about making sure no other child went through a similar hell as he did, which aligns, as I mentioned, with a lot of what other psychology scholars go through. It just it brings me so much emotion, but this isn't the time and place to get vulnerable. Helmut Kentler's writings were seen as a wave of new thinking. I mean, this is mid-1900s Germany we're talking about, remember? So much so that he was asked to lead the Department of Social Education at the International Research Institute of Berlin. Helmut's work and research was specifically with runaway heroin addicts and young prostitutes, many of whom gathered in the various transportation hubs of West Berlin. So think New York subways, kind of. Early in his work, Kentler befriended a 13-year-old boy named Ulrich. Kentler described this child as, quote, one of the most sought after prostitutes in the station scene, unquote. We're getting into dangerous territory now. One day, Kentler asked Ulrich where he wanted to stay at night, to which Ulrich answered by telling him about a man known as Mother Winter. The man known to Ulrich as Mother Winter fed runaway addict prostitute boys from the subway systems. Mother Winter fed, catered, and did these boys' laundry in exchange for sexual favors. This Mother Winter provided these boys shelter, food, and clean clothes in exchange for sex. Mother Winter provided these boys shelter, food, and clean clothes in exchange for sex. Helmut heard this, and instead of calling the police or doing his part as a scholar and important figure in social work, instead he thought to himself, hey, this may not be the worst thing in the world. He said to himself, quote, if the prostitutes call this man mother, he can't be that bad. He noted that it was especially of an advantage if the boys were handsome and enjoyed the sex. So, in a way, he, the child, could give something back to the pedophile who looked after him. What just happened? I had so much faith in Helmut. He had so much potential. I hate men. Period. All men. Not all men, but it's always a man. With this sick and twisted information and thought process, Helmut got to work. He managed to get the Senate officer responsible to approve his theory and work. Once it was approved, he found several other PDFiles who lived nearby and helped them set up foster homes. At the time, the Berlin Senate, which governs the city of Berlin, was eager to find new solutions to the life problems of our society in order to confirm and maintain Berlin's reputation as a reflection of freedom and humanity. The problem, one of the problems with Kentler at the time was that he saw pedophilia and queerness as equals. He argued that homosexuality should be approved and the fact that it was natural and all that jazz, which is great. But then his biggest mistake was comparing it to pedophilia and saying the same thing. Absolutely the fuck not. Especially when you take into consideration that the men who were chosen to be the foster homes in this experiment were men with money and power. Not just some old schmo from down the street. No names have ever been revealed, but reports are adamant that these foster homes were ran by powerful men who lived alone and who were given this power through academia, research, and institutions and other environments that accepted, supported, and even lived out their pedophilic stances. In fact, at no surprise, Kentler himself was at the heart of this experiment. Kentler. In the 1980s, he was the single father of 3 adopted sons and several foster children. 2 of Kentler's foster kids have reported to sexual abuse from Kentler. 2 that we know of because they had the courage to speak up. It is, however, reported that many of his children were afraid to speak up because they didn't want to lose the positives of Kentler's care. Again, shelter, food, clean clothes, hot water. Kentler provided food, shelter, and care, something that a lot of these kids had never received in their life. This whole experiment was on the premise that some children are fundamentally second-class citizens. Their outlook so compromised that any kind of amount of love is a gift. And as someone as achieved as Kentler and as high as the Senate were on board, there was nothing to worry about, right? According to Kentler, PDFiles are benefactors. They offered neglected children a possibility for therapy. Followed by, quote, homosexuals are caregivers and educators. Again, homosexuality and pedophilia are not synonymous. In the late 1980s, Kentler explained that there was no need to worry, though. There was no harm being done to these children, no need to worry that children would be harmed by sexual contact with caretakers, as long as the interaction was not forced. Again, these are children who cannot consent. This is not consensual. This is 100% forced. Moreover, according to Kentler, the consequences can be very positive, especially when the sexual relationship can be characterized as mutual love. Fuck out of here. Also, did you guys catch me say the late 1980s? 1980 1908 to be exact. You may be asking yourself, were there no laws against pedophiles in Germany in the 1980s? The answer is yes. Not as much as today, but there were some. However, remember, Kentler was an academic nonetheless. He was familiar with social laws and the legal system, but his priority was his experiment. So how did he go around these laws? Statute of limitations. The statute of limitations being over a decade is why we didn't learn about his experiment until the early 2000s. In 1991, Kentler had a small reality check when his youngest adopted son committed suicide. Honestly, something that will forever be baffling to me is that Kentler knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew that it was completely wrong. He was a well-established academic in the social sciences with a background in psychology. He himself had had a traumatic childhood, and this wasn't even at a time, say like before Freud. This was like not even 40 years ago, and the research and the knowledge was there. For example, one of my favorite child psychoanalysts, Dr. Sandor Ferenczi, who was alive before Helmut, mind you, established that sexualized relationships between adults and children are always asymmetrical, exploitative, and destructive. He, as in Ferenczi, has always warned that to give children more love or love of a different kind than what a child seeks and needs will have just a pathogenic consequence as denying them love altogether. Children's personalities are not sufficiently consolidated in order to be able to protest, as in not having the ability or the mental capacity for consent. Children will subordinate themselves like automata and will become oblivious of their own needs and identify themselves with the aggressor. A child's mind and personality are so sensitive, but also so intuitive, and together it is extremely dangerous. And for some reason, society just sometimes tends to forget the latter. After his youngest adopted son committed suicide, Kentler spoke of his grief for his adopted son. However, he did not confess to abusing him. Instead, he said that the boy had been sexually abused by his birth mother. He did, however, admit that his experiment may be culpable of such actions by other children due to the fault of the other foster parents. As in, other children of the experiment could be victims of suicide because of the other foster parents. Not him, the other foster parents. He admitted that he was partly to blame because he claimed he didn't understand that a child recovering from sexual abuse has actual emotional complexities. Kentler made the claim that because he didn't know this, he was technically innocent and not culpable at the same time. Quote, "I was too stupid," unquote. That's an actual quote from Kentler. In a 1999 interview, Kentler made his last statement regarding pedophilia. He referred to it as a sexual disorder and alluded to the impossibility of an adult and a child sharing an understanding of sexual contact. The problem, he said, is that the adult will always have the monopoly on definition. I don't buy that he didn't know, and I really hope you don't either. Not only is it common sense, but you're telling me that he, the PhD, wasn't able to pick up a book to know that pedophilia is not equivalent to love and care? Fuck out of here. Helmut Kentler died in 2008. Even after his death, investigations kept going because, as I mentioned earlier, there is no exact number of how many children were placed in these pedophile foster homes. Believe it or not, as of June of 2020, the Berlin Senator of Education promised those affected by abuse from the Kentler experiment financial compensation from the state of Berlin. 2020. 5 years ago. Fuck out of here. Well, my curious cats, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I apologize if it's not a lot more if it's a lot more depressing than what we're typically used to on this channel, but not everything in academia is jokes, fun, and games, sadly. It is a learning process for sure. Let me know your thoughts, opinions, and all that. I'll make sure that our next episode is a bit more lighthearted. Promise. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, and comment on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Instagram. Stay blessed, stay safe, and stay psyched. I love you. Bye.